Hello everyone, my name is Evan Ramirez, and I'm here to talk about my claim of fact, which is, the topic is offshore oil drilling. And basically what that is, if you don't already know, it's when you take very large drills and pipes and you just burrow into the seabed to drill into underground oil pockets. And my major claim today is that the cons of offshore oil drilling and expansion of it greatly outweigh the pros. And I will be supporting this claim with three secondary claims. The first one is that there are extreme environmental issues involved with this. The second one is that there isn't enough oil left in the U.S. to make a very large oil impact. And the third is that oil rigs are dangerous to the workers that are on them. So, going with my first secondary claim, as we all know, oil spills are a very prevalent issue regarding offshore oil drilling. And I'm sure everybody can remember the 2003 oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, where over 200 million gallons of oil were released into the ocean. And this is still causing problems today because we're still cleaning up after it. And this is costing the U.S. more money, and it's a lot of wasted resources for a problem that could have been solved by just not drilling it. And another environmental issue is that noise and residue from drill sites can greatly impact the indigenous life around them. So regarding that, the way the drills go into the ground, they basically go down underground and they pump water into the oil like pockets and bring it back up. And all of this they call it backwater, and all of this just comes back up through the pipes and releases out into the surrounding water. And this suffocates fish, kills eggs and coral reefs, and just causes huge problems for all the animals that are living around it. And from an article that I read called Stemming the Tide from earthjustice.org, they say that most areas where oil rigs are present show a 80% decrease in life around it because of all of the residue and noise that is being made from the oil rigs and all the drilling that is happening there. My second secondary claim is that there isn't enough oil to make a large impact on the U.S. for a very long time. And from an article that I read called How Much Oil Is There Really Left, they say that there's about 1,333 barrels worth of oil left to be pumped out of the U.S. oceans and land. And with the way the U.S. Burns through oil like it does now, that would only last us for another 40 years. And that's like really thinking that's not a very long time, considering that more cars are being produced, more like airplanes and things like that. All of these things need to run off of crude oil sources, and with the way the human race is expanding at the rate that it is now, it won't last as much longer than that. And once all of the oil runs out in the U.S., we'll still have to rely on foreign imports of oil. Like, many experts believe that if we keep drilling in the U.S., that we will be more independent from the dangerous foreign exporters that we make deals with now, like Saudi Arabia, who owns more than 20% of the oil land, like in the world. And although it would help for a while, we'd still just have to go back to them and keep asking for more oil because we don't have enough to support our growing country. And then finally, oil rigs are dangerous to their workers because there's still many dangers on top of the rig that you don't normally hear about. Like oil rig fires are a big danger to the workers and the companies that own them, because these rigs are filled with volatile gases, and obviously oil is a very dangerous chemical to be working with. So any mistake could possibly end up in an explosion or a fire on the rig, bringing the crew into more danger than they need to be. And another way it's dangerous is that equipment is usually faulty, and that it takes a lot of money to repair it rather than just replace it. And a lot of these big companies don't want to spend that money to keep it running efficiently, which causes leaks and just unneeded dangers to the workers.
All right, Evan, the proposition's clearly identified. I think the phrasing is a little bit awkward, the pros and the cons. I think there's probably other terminology that would be more appropriate, more descriptive of what you're talking about, whether or not we're talking about the economic benefits or the environmental costs, the advantages versus the disadvantages. There's got to be another way of saying it so that it's not quite as ambiguous. I do think that you did a pretty good job indicating what the secondary points were going to be, although you do need to project a little bit more, because on your second point in the preview, I couldn't tell which direction you were going with that claim, because I just think that you not so much slurred your words, but you were just not as clear and articulate as you could be. Now, when you got to it, you did signpost it in the body of the speech, so that was relatively clear, and I appreciated that. In fact, that's the strongest thing in the speech, is that it was easy to follow based on the structure that you provided us. So we're not going to get lost as we're listening to what you're talking about. The total impact on any of these things is very hard to measure. The closest that you come to having any substantial evidence on this point is the one quote that you give us from the environmental group, Stemming the Tide, that talks about an 80% decrease in the life around these oil derricks in the ocean. And I thought that that was the one solid piece of data that you had in the presentation. Everything else is ephemeral. It's a vague reference. I believe that the oil spill that you're talking about was not in 2003, but it was in like 2009. You're talking about the BP spill, aren't you?
Yeah.
In the Gulf of Mexico. So that's an example of something that's ambiguous. I mean, you've got it 6 years earlier at a different time period. I'm not even sure about the 2009, but I know it was after Obama was president, so it seemed to me like it was a year or two after he became president. So you want to make sure you get those things correct. And that's not hard to find information on. Holy crimey, that was covered all over the place. So you ought to be able to tell us how much oil was spilled, how much damage was done, how much BP had to pay to compensate people in that situation. And you say we're still trying to fix problems from that time period. So give me an example of something that hasn't been fixed. Show me a continuing problem or an economic hardship that somebody suffered from in this situation, or an environmental damage that you can say, you know, there are 40% fewer oysters in this bed because of this thing, or there are, 10,000 pelicans washing up on shore, or something that's more quantitative. You just kind of keep it as this vague thing that happened, and hopefully that'll be enough for people to be afraid of a spill like that. My guess would be when the respondent comes back and talks about this, says, okay, we've got one oil derrick that we had a failure and it was a critical failure, and that's the one example that he can point to in the last 50 years of something that was that substantial. That's the only proof that there's anything dangerous to the environment about these kinds of things. And we did X, Y, and Z, so on and so forth, and they're going to try and minimize the argument that you're making there, and all you've got is, like I said, a vague reference to that particular point. So if this was an ongoing debate, I think that would be a little bit problematic. Like I said, the one concrete piece of information you had was the statistic about the decreased sea life from the backwater and the things that are going on around the derricks. That would be helpful in the context of, well, how many of these things do we have out there? If there are 10,000 of them, that seems like it's pretty substantial. You got an 80% decrease around 10,000 derricks in the ocean. That's pretty substantial. If there are 50 of them, I don't know how big a deal it is. All right, so the fish live someplace else. Does that mean they're disappearing from the ocean? Does that mean that there are fewer of them, or does it just mean that they moved a mile down the road? The sea life in that area, I don't know. And that's the most solid piece of evidence that you have in your argument. The stuff on the danger to the workers is all very hypothetical, and this is another one of those places where there have been explosions, there have been fires, and you ought to be able to cite those examples. The examples are not hard to come by here, and a concrete example is going to stop somebody in their tracks when they say, oh, it's perfectly safe, we don't have those problems. And you say, well, tell it to the 43 guys who are dead in this particular fire here. Tell it to the 6,000 families who are left without their key family member over the last 50 years. Give us something that's substantial on that point that shows that this is in fact a real threat. You make an assertion that says that the companies don't want to pay for new equipment, they don't want to pay for repairs. What's that based on? Who said that? Why do you believe that's true? Wouldn't these companies be liable in those situations if they didn't provide that kind of safety equipment? Who would work there if it was an obviously unsafe environment? There are high-risk jobs everywhere. I mean, let's face it, people calculate those kinds of things based on the risk, whether it's police officer, firefighter, contractor, pool cleaning guy. They're all different levels of degree of risk that people might be willing to accept. But nobody's going to say, well, if there's an 80% chance I'm going to die in this situation, I'm going to take that job. I don't know that we have any calculation about what that risk factor is. Maybe there's a way of measuring those kinds of things. Has there been a survey that measures the most dangerous jobs on the planet? And this is right after apparently fishing, which is apparently one of those ones. Working on those fishing boats is pretty damn dangerous. Maybe this is number 2, something like that would make the argument for you. I just see a shortage of data here. I think you've read about it. I think you've got some ideas about it. I think you've got the reason. The secondary points are reasonable points to be making on this particular issue, but there's not enough information and context for it to work as well. And your argument about, well, there's not that much fuel there. There's only 43 years. By the way, the data that you had is like we only have 1,033 barrels left. I know that can't be right because I probably use 1,033 barrels myself each year. So I think there's probably a number there, maybe trillion barrels or something like that you've gotten inaccurate there, and that's one of those things that affects credibility too. So you want to be careful about that. This is one of the problems when you are paraphrasing or summarizing instead of quoting directly. The more direct quotes will solve a lot of those problems. All right, thank you.